Alexander and his lover went to the courts to talk about the inheritance after the funeral of his wife, but the lawyers suddenly told them that his wife had changed her will just days before she died. After things got worse when his wife's nephew showed up, things got even better. The smell of the air was a bittersweet mix of marigolds and new dirt. In the middle of this scene, a group of black-clad people gathered around a new grave. As the hot sun beat down on them in San Francisco, their sad faces were hidden. Alex Thompson stood in the front row, facing the mahogany box that held the body of his wife Rose Anderson. He was a handsome man with deep eyes. His perfectly cut black suit clashed against the ness of his face. It was the face of a man who had practiced being sad. It was a mask of sadness that covered up the real thoughts the man was having. He said, "Rest in peace, Rose," as he threw some dirt on the coffin. The graveyard was dead quiet, but the sound of earth hitting wood could be heard. Yet his eyes didn't show the sorrow that his voice suggested. They gleamed with a cold, calculating light that escaped the notice of those mourning around him. Jessica Turner, Alex's young and beautiful secretary, stood not far behind him. She had a look of impatience on her face that was veiled by pity. Her black dress, sleek and form-fitting, seemed out of place on the gloomy occasion. Her eyes met Alex's for a short moment, exchanging a glance, laden with hidden meanings and silent promises. The priest, an elderly man with a voice worn from years of work, droned on with the final prayers. His words merged with the distant hum of city traffic, causing a strange lullaby. Alex pretended to listen, but his thoughts were elsewhere on the details of his plan. Rose's sudden death, apparently from a heart attack, had been an unexpected stroke of luck. With his wife out of the way, the wealth he craved now seemed tantalizingly within reach. Among the mourners, high society figures mingled with workers from Rose's companies. Whispers of condolences and shared memories floated in the air, making a soft murmur that accompanied Alex's silent musings. As the ceremony ended, the mourners began to disperse like a flock of ravens taking flight. Alex accepted their sympathies with a solemn expression, shaking hands and muttering thanks. His mind, however, was far from the funeral. It was busy calculating numbers and imagining the luxurious, ease life that awaited him. Jessica stayed close, giving quiet support, handing out thank-you cards to the guests. Her perfume, light but persistent, reached Alex, stirring memories of their clandestine moments. "Mr. Thompson," a deep voice cut through his thoughts. Alex turned to face Luke Anderson, Rose's nephew. The young man in his mid-30s had red rim eyes from crying, but his gaze was steady and sharp. "My deepest sorrow. Aunt Rose was an amazing woman," Luke said, his voice laced with feeling. Alex nodded, studying Luke's face. Luke had always been Rose's favorite, almost like a son to her. This had irked Alex for years. "Thank you, Luke. Your aunt loved you very much. You were the son we never had," Alex replied smoothly, though Luke's intense look made him feel briefly exposed. She always thought of everyone's well-being. Her generosity knew no limits. Luke added his tone, carrying a weight that made Alex nervous. Before Alex could reply, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Grateful for the break, he excused himself with a gesture and stepped away from the group to take the call. "Hello," he answered quietly, turning his back to the weeping. "Mr. Thompson, this is Attorney Phillips from the official office." The voice on the other end said, "I need you to come to the courts tomorrow. There's a pressing matter regarding Mrs. Anderson's will that needs your immediate attention." Alex's heart skipped to beat. Something in the lawyer's tone made him pause. Alex's heart skipped to beat, a mix of anticipation and worry running through his body. "Tomorrow, can't it wait a few days? We just married my wife." "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, but it's of the greatest importance. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., don't be late." The notary insisted his tone, leaving no room for argument. The call ended, leaving Alex with a lasting unease he couldn't shake off. He walked over to Jessica, who was saying farewell to the last guests with understanding smiles and comforting handshakes. "We need to go to the civil registry tomorrow," he whispered, leaning close to her ear under the pretense of adjusting a flower on her lapel. "The notary says it's important." Jessica gave a barely visible nod, her eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and caution. "Do you think there'll be any problems?" she murmured, keeping a somber face for the onlookers. Alex shook his head, giving a confident smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Not at all. It's just a routine. By this time tomorrow we'll be celebrating our new life as the sun set over the graveyard, casting long shadows over the graves and painting the sky in hues of red and violet. Alex and Jessica shared one final conspiratorial glance before leaving. The funeral was over, but for them it was only the prelude to what was coming next. On their way out, Alex couldn't help but notice how Luke watched him with an unreading look. For a moment, a chill ran down his spine, but he chalked it up to the tiredness and stress of the day. He got into his expensive car where Jessica was already waiting. He started the engine, leaving the graveyard behind, and he hoped all the obstacles standing between him and Rose's fortune. Alex Thompson, however, woke up the next morning with an odd energy. He dressed carefully, picking a dark gray suit that gave him an air of seriousness and respect, perfect for the occasion. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror, he mentally reviewed the figures of Rose's fortune, properties in the city's most exclusive areas, shares in top companies, foreign bank accounts, an empire built over decades that finally would be within his reach. The sound of his phone pulled him out of his thoughts. It was Jessica. "Good morning, love," she whispered on the other end of the call. "Ready for the big day?" Alex smiled, allowing himself a moment of real joy. "More than ready. I'll meet you at the Civil Register in an hour." He left his luxurious home in Russian Hill and climbed into his brand-new Mercedes. The city traffic was hectic, as usual. But not even the impatient honking of other cars could dampen his mood. When he arrived at the civil registry in the Roman neighborhood, Alex noticed that Jessica was already there waiting for him at the door. She was wearing a simple but beautiful black dress with a small silver brooch that Rose had given her for her last birthday. The detail didn't escape Alex's attention, and he nodded approvingly. "You look beautiful," he said softly as they entered the building. "Remember, caution is key." Jessica nodded, her face a mask of contained sadness that hid the excitement she felt inside. Together they walked toward Notary Phillips's office. The hallway of the Civil Register smelled of old paper and disinfectant. The faded cream-colored walls were decorated with informational posters and official photos of officials no one recognized. Alex and Jessica walked with purpose, their footsteps booming on the mosaic floor. Alex stopped dead in his tracks. Standing right in front of the notary's office was Luke Anderson, Rose's nephew. His sudden appearance was like a cold shower for the pair. "Good morning, Uncle Alex." Luke greeted with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What a surprise to run into you here." Alex quickly pulled himself together, faking a smile. "Luke, I didn't expect to see you. What are you doing here?" Before Luke could answer, the office door opened and in walked Attorney Phillips, a short, stocky man with thick-rimmed glasses. "Ah, everyone's here. Wonderful. Please come in," he said, stepping aside to let them enter. The office was small, crammed with filing cabinets and law books. The notary sat down behind a dark wooden desk and motioned for them to sit in the chairs placed in front of him. "Mr. Thompson, Miss Turner, Mr. Anderson," the notary began looking over his glasses at them. "I've called you here today because there's an important matter we need to address regarding the will of Mrs. Rose Anderson." Alex leaned forward, his heart beating. "What's this about, attorney? I thought everything was fixed." The notary cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, Mr. Thompson, there's been a change to your wife's will." His words hit the room like a bomb. Alex felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Next to him, Jessica tensed up. Phillips pulled a package from a drawer and opened it carefully. Mrs. Anderson made a change to her will exactly 1 week ago, 3 days before her death. Alex glanced at Luke, who stayed calm as if the news didn't surprise him at all. Suspicion began to creep into Alex's mind. "That's impossible," Alex objected. "Rose never mentioned changing her will. There must be a mistake." The official shook his head. "There's no mistake, Mr. Thompson. The change is legal and it was made following all the needed protocols. Mrs. Anderson was of sound mind when she made the choice." Jessica, who had stayed silent until then, finally spoke up. "But what does this news say exactly?" Attorney Phillips cleared his throat again before starting. "The most important change is the distribution of assets. Mrs. Anderson has chosen to donate a large portion of her estate to various charities." Alex felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "What amount exactly?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, 60% of her wealth. The notary answered, avoiding direct eye contact with Alex. The news hit Alex like a punch to the gut. 60%, more than half of the wealth he thought was secure, gone before his eyes. This is ridiculous, Alex shouted, losing his calm. One Rose would never do something like this without asking me. I demand to see that paper. The notary, with a resigned expression, gave Alex a copy of the will. Alex snatched it from his hands and began reading it frantically, looking for an error, some loophole he could exploit. While Alex buried himself in the document, Jessica watched the scene progress with a mix of horror and fascination. Her dreams of a life of luxury were falling before her eyes. She glanced at Luke, trying to his face, but the young man appeared strangely calm. "Did you know about this, Jessica?" whispered to Luke. He shrugged. Aunt Rose was always full of shocks. Luke's cryptic answer only heightened Jessica's unease. What else did he know that they didn't? Meanwhile, Alex had reached the end of the paper. His face was pale and a thin layer of sweat covered his forehead. "This can't be legal," he said, looking at the notary with a mix of panic and threat. "There has to be a way to fight this, Will?" Attorney Phillips shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mr. Thompson, I promise you everything is in order." Mrs. Anderson took all the necessary legal steps to ensure her final wishes would be respected. Alex stood up suddenly, his chair screeching against the floor. "I'm not taking this. I'll hire the best lawyers. I'll take this case all the way to the Supreme Court, if I have to." Luke, who had stayed silent until then, spoke up in a calm but firm voice. "Uncle Alex, I think you need to calm down and think this through. Aunt Rose made this choice for a reason." Alex shot Luke an aggressive look. "And what do you know about Rose's reason? Did you have something to do with this last-minute change?" The tension in the room was evident. The notary nervously glanced around as if he feared a fight could break out at any time. "Gentlemen, please," Attorney Phillips interfered. "I understand this news is shocking, but I promise you everything has been done according to the law. If you wish to challenge the will, that's your right, but you should know it will be a long and costly process with very little chance of success." Alex ran a hand through his hair, messing it up as his mind raced, looking for a way out of this unexpected situation. How could Rose have done this to him? Had she found out something, or had she simply chosen in her final days to change her legacy? Jessica, seeing Alex's agitation, thought it was time to step in. "Mr. Phillips, could we get a copy of the will to review it thoroughly? I think we all need some time to process this information." The notary nodded, visibly relieved by the idea. "Of course, I'll prepare official copies for each of you. In the meantime, I suggest you carefully consider your next steps." As the notary worked on making the copies, an awkward silence settled in the office. Alex stared out the window, his mind swirling with feelings and frustrated plans. Jessica nervously fiddled with her necklace, throwing furtive glances at Luke, who remained unbothered. Finally, Mr. Phillips returned with the copies. "Here you go. If you have any questions or need clarification, don't hesitate to reach me." Alex took his copy without a word and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned to Luke. "This isn't over, I'm going to get to the bottom of this." Luke simply nodded, his face unreadable. "Do whatever you feel is necessary, Uncle, but remember Aunt Rose always thought about everyone's well-being." With one last suspicious glance, Alex left the office, followed closely by Jessica. The hallway of the register office, which just an hour ago had seemed like the path to wealth, now felt like a dark, uncertain tunnel. As they walked toward the exit, Jessica dared to break the quiet. "What are we going to do now, Alex?" He stopped and looked at her, his eyes gleaming with a mix of determination and barely controlled fury. "We're going to fight, Jessica. This can't end like this. Rose had no right to do this to us." Jessica nodded, but a seed of doubt had already been placed in her mind. Did they really know Rose as well as they thought, and what part did Luke play in all of this? As they stepped outside, the gray, threatening sky over San Francisco City seemed to match the storm brewing in their lives. What had started as a day of hope and anticipation had turned into the beginning of a battle, one that threatened to reveal long-buried secrets and test loyalties they had believed to be unshakable. Alex and Jessica walked in silence to the parking lot. The noise of the city seemed far away, muffled by the shock of what they had just heard. When they reached the car, Alex slammed his fist against the steering wheel in anger. "Damn it!" he yelled, his voice cracking slightly. "All this time, way in for this moment. And now what?" Jessica put a hand on his shoulder, trying to calm him. "Alex, we need to think clearly. Maybe there's something we can do." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and hopelessness. "How could Rose do this to us?" "Jessica." "How? I don't know," she answered, biting her lip. "But didn't you think?" Luke seemed like he knew more than he was letting on. Alex nodded slowly, his mind racing. He was always Rose's favorite. Maybe he got her to change her will, but why? Luke already has his own cash. What would he gain from this? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Alex started the car and they pulled out of the parking lot, moving into the chaotic traffic of the city. As they crawled through the congested streets, Alex couldn't stop thinking about all the times he had dreamed about this day. It was meant to be the start of a new life, one filled with luxury and freedom. Instead, he felt stuck, as if the walls of his perfectly planned future were closing in on him. "We need a plan," he finally said, breaking the tense quiet. "We can't let this end here." Jessica nodded. Her mind already working on the options. Maybe we could find a mistake in the process of changing the will, something that would allow us to challenge it. "Yeah, that could work," Alex muttered, his face shifting from despair to determination. "I know some lawyers who specialize in this kind of thing. I'll have them go over the paper with a fine-tooth comb." They turned a corner, leaving behind the hustle and bustle of downtown, and headed into the quieter streets of the city. The modern buildings and luxury shops seemed to mock them, telling them of what they had been so close to achieving. "What if we don't find anything?" Jessica's voice was barely a whisper. Alex gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Then we'll just have to get more clever." The meaning behind his words sent a chill down Jessica's spine. "What do you mean by that exactly?" she asked, her tone tense. "Whatever it takes, Jessica, we've come too far to quit now." The rest of the ride was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they finally pulled up to Alex's luxurious residence, they sat in the car for a moment, neither willing to face the reality waiting outside. "You want to come in?" Alex's voice was tired. Jessica shook her head. "I think I need some time alone to process everything. I'll call you later, okay?" Alex nodded, leaning in to give her a quick kiss before she stepped out of the car. He watched her walk away, her slender figure blending in with the people moving along the busy avenue. Once he was alone, Alex went inside the house. The quiet hit him like a wave. He hadn't realized just how much he missed the steady movement of the staff, the business calls of Rose, the hum of activity that used to fill his home. He poured himself a whiskey and collapsed onto the living room couch. His eyes landed on the picture of Rose hanging above the fireplace. The woman in the picture smiled enigmatically like she knew something he didn't. "Why Rose?" he mumbled, raising his glass in a bitter toast. "What were you thinking?" The ringing of his phone snapped him out of his thoughts for a second. He considered not answering, but the caller ID showed a known number. "Yeah," he answered, doing his best to sound calm. "Alex, it's me." Ramon came the voice on the other end. Ramon was one of his business contacts, someone who always seemed to have the inside news before anyone else. "Ramon, what a treat. What can I do for you?" There was a short awkward pause before Ron spoke again. "Listen, I've been hearing some stories about Rose's will. Is it true? She changed everything at the last minute." Alex tensed up. How had the news spread so quickly where? "You hear that, Ramon? You know how it is, man. News travels fast in our groups. But tell me, is it true?" Alex thought about his choices for a moment, denying it might buy him some time. But if the reports were already out there, the truth wouldn't stay hidden for long. There were some surprising changes. He finally admitted. "But we're handling it. There's nothing to worry about." Ramon let out a low whistle. "Wow, man, I'm sorry to hear that. If you need anything, you know you can count on me." "Thanks, Ramon, I'll keep that in mind." After hanging up, Alex stared at the phone in his hand. If Ramon knew, who else did? The thought of becoming the laughingstock of high society, the widower tricked by his own wife, made his stomach turn. He got up and walked toward Rose's study. The room was exactly how she had left it, papers spread across the desk, and a half-finished cup of coffee sitting on the edge. Alex started rifling through the documents, searching for some kind of clue, anything that might explain his wife's sudden decision. As he looked through the papers, his mind kept racing. Had Rose found out about his fling with Jessica, or was there something else, something he was missing? The sound of his phone buzzing surprised him. It was a message from Jessica. "We need to talk, it's important." Alex felt a knot form in his stomach. What else could possibly go wrong? With a sigh of despair, he replied, "Okay, let's meet in an hour at the usual place." He put the phone down and looked at Rosie's portrait one last time. For a split second it seemed as though his wife's smile had gotten wider, more mocking. "This isn't over," he muttered more to himself than to the picture. "One way or another, I'll figure out what you were up to, Rose, and when I do, I'll take back what's mine." With that quiet promise, Alex stepped out of the study, closing the door behind him. The game had just started, and he was determined not to lose. The scent of fresh coffee and the murmur of conversations filled the air. At a private table near the window, Alex nervously waited for Jessica, his eyes flicking between the door and the wall clock. The moment Jessica walked in, Alex knew something was wrong. Her usually flawless face was marked with concern, and her typical confidence seemed to have disappeared. "What's going on?" Alex asked quietly. As Jessica took a seat, she glanced around before leaning in closer. "Anonymous," she whispered. "Someone knows about us, Alex, and they're threatening to tell everyone if we try to fight the will." Alex felt as if a bucket of ice-cold water had been dumped over him. "What? Who? What did they say exactly?" "I don't know." Jessica's voice trembled slightly. It was twisted. "But they knew things, Alex. Things only we would know." Alex's mind raced. Who could know? Luke, a house employee? Or maybe Rose had figured out the affair before she died. "This changes everything," he whispered, running a hand through his hair. "If this gets out, we'll lose more than just the inheritance. My reputation, my job, everything goes up in flames." Jessica looked at him, fear and determination filling her eyes. "What are we going to do?" Alex stayed silent for a moment, weighing his choices. Finally, with a resigned sigh, he said, "We need help, someone who can research this quietly." "Who do you have in mind?" Jessica asked. "Someone from my past." Alex replied, his mind drifting back in time. "Someone. I owe him a favor." As Alex pulled out his phone to make a call, his thoughts returned to his early days in San Francisco City, long before he met Rose. 20 years ago, Alex Thompson was a young lawyer fresh out of Sunflower, Mississippi, full of desire and hungry for success. With his cheap suit and knockoff briefcase, he wandered the streets of the historic center looking for any chance to make connections and land clients. It was during that time he met Henry Mendoza, a private detective with contacts at every level San Francisco society. Henry saw promise in young Alex and took him under his wing, teaching him the ins and outs of power in the capital, in this city. Kid Henry had told him one night as they shared tequila at a dirty cantina, "Information is power and power is money." Alex drank up every word, every piece of advice like a sponge. He learned how to navigate the right circles, make the right links, and keep secrets that could destroy careers or build empires. It was Henry who introduced him to Rose. She's 15 years older than Alex, an impressive woman, intelligent, sophisticated, and, most importantly, immensely rich. "That woman is your ticket to the top, kid," Henry had whispered in his ear. "Don't blow it." Alex didn't need to be told twice. He unleashed all his charm, wit, and drive to win Rose over, and it worked. In less than a year they were married in a lavish wedding that became the talk of high society in San Francisco. The first few years of their marriage were good. Alex worked hard learning the ropes of Rose's business, making connection and building his own name. But as time passed, the age difference began to weigh on him. Rose stayed a beautiful and vibrant woman, but Alex started feeling restless. That was when Jessica came into the picture. Young, ambitious, and beautiful, she was everything Alex thought was missing from his life. What began as a casual fling quickly grew into something deeper, more danger-dose. The sound of Henry's voice on the other end of the line snapped Alex back to the present. Well, said the old detective, his voice growly from years of cheap whiskey and smokes. "The great Alex Thompson needs my help. This must be big." "It is, Henry," Alex responded, aware of Jessica's questioning look. "I need you to look into something for me, and it has to be done with the greatest discretion." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "I'm listening," Henry finally said. Alex quickly summarized the situation, leaving out certain incriminating facts. When he finished, Henry let out a low whistle. "You've got yourself into a real mess, kid," he said. "But for old time's sake, I'll help. Give me a couple of days to dig around." After hanging up, Alex turned to Jessica. "We have to be very careful from now on," he warned. "No more talks, no suspicious calls. We act like nothing happened." Jessica nodded, though Alex could see the fear in her eyes. "And if whoever's blackmailing us chooses to talk anyway, we'll be ready," Alex added, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Henry's good at what he does. If there's anything to find, he'll find it." They left the cafe individually, agreeing not to see each other for a few days. As Alex walked to his car, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. He looked around, but the streets were full of regular people, office workers leaving for the day. Students, tourists, no one seemed to be giving him any special attention. Still, the Fae remained. Was he getting paranoid? Or was someone really out there tracking his every move? The next few days were pain for Alex. Every call, every text message set his nerves on edge. Would this be the call that revealed everything? The message that destroyed his carefully built life? To keep up appearances, he stuck to his pattern. He went to the office, attended meetings, and even made some public appearances connected to Rose's businesses, but inside he was a wreck. One afternoon, while going through some papers in his office, an unexpected visitor showed up. Luke Anderson, Rose's nephew, arrived at the door, Uncle Alex. Luke greeted him. His smile, not quite reaching his eyes, got a minute. Alex tensed but kept his face neutral. "Of course, Luke, come in." Luke stepped inside and sat down across from Alex's desk for a moment. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched on, uncomfortable and thick with stress. "How can I help you?" Alex finally asked, breaking the quiet. Luke stared at him intently. "I wanted to talk to you about Aunt Rose's will." Alex felt his heart race, but he kept his cool. "What about it?" "I know you're thinking about contesting it," Luke said frankly. "I want to ask you not to." "And why shouldn't I?" Alex replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "She was my wife, Luke. I have the right to question her final choices, especially if they were unexpected." Luke leaned forward, his eyes never leaving Alex's aunt. "Rose had her reasons, good reasons." "What reasons?" Alex asked, feeling like he was on the brink of something important. But Luke just smiled, a smile that reminded Alex strangely of Rose. "That's something you'll have to find out for yourself, Uncle, but let me warn you, if you keep going down this road, you might uncover things you'd rather not know." With those mysterious words, Luke stood up and left the office, leaving Alex with more questions than answers. That night, unable to sleep, Alex found himself walking through the house. His steps inevitably led him to Rose's room. He walked in, flipped on the light and glanced around the room. Was there anything here, anything that could explain Rose's sudden change? Alex began digging through the desk drawers, scanning the bookshelves. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but he had to do something, anything that. When he spotted it, a small leather-bound notebook tucked behind a few financial ledges. Carefully, he pulled it out and opened it. It was Rose's book. For a moment, Alex paused. Reading his late wife's book felt like a violation even to him, but the need to know, to understand, overpowered him. He started reading. The first posts were pretty harmless thoughts about the business note on meetings, personal reflections. But as he continued, the tone changed. Alex came home late again last night. One note from a few months ago read, "He said he was working, but his shirt smelled like women's perfume. How much longer can I ignore the obvious?" Alex's stomach tightened into a knot. Rose had known for how long he kept reading, his heart pounding faster with every line. The entries grew more bitter, more painful. "I hired a private detective." One post from a few weeks before her death said, "I don't want to believe it, but I need to know the truth." And then the final post written just 2 days before she died. "I know everything about Alex and Jessica, about their plans, about it all. How foolish I was to think he truly loved me. But I won't give them the pleasure. I've made my choice." May God forgive me. Alex slammed the book shut, nausea creeping up his throat. Rose had known, she had known everything. The change in the will hadn't been a whim. It was her final act of revenge. His phone buzzed, startling him. It was a message from Henry. I've got facts. See you tomorrow at 10, same place. Alex looked at the message, then back at the diary in his hands. What more could Henry possibly know that he didn't, and what was he supposed to do with this information? As he placed the diary back where he found it, Alex realized he had hit a point of no return. The choices he made in the next few hours would determine not only his financial future, but also his freedom and his conscience. Would he move forward with contesting the will, risking everything being exposed, or would he accept loss and live with the guilt of knowing he betrayed the woman who had given him everything? By dawn, Alex was still awake, sitting in Rose's office, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. In just a few hours he would meet Henry and make his choice, but for now, in the quiet of the early morning, Alex Thompson allowed himself to do something he hadn't done in years. He cried. He cried for Rose, for the love they had lost, for the life they could have had, and he cried for himself, for the man he had become. As the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows, Alex wiped away his tears and stood up. He had a choice to make and time was running out. He showered and dressed mechanically, his mind still spinning with the revelations he had found. As he fixed his tie in front of the mirror, he wondered if she could see him now. Would she pity him, hate him, or perhaps, despite everything, still feel a trace of love? Alex left the house just as the sun started to warm the streets the morning. Traffic was already building, but he barely noticed. His mind was set on Dare, the old neighborhood where he and Henry used to meet back when Alex was just an ambitious lawyer and Henry was his mentor in the darker corridors of power. Henry was already there when Alex arrived, sitting on a bench feeding the pigeons. Despite the years, he still had that grizzled, hard-boiled detective look straight out of a noir novel. You look like hell, kid. Henry welcomed him as Alex sat down. Thanks. Alex replied dry. What have you got for me? Henry pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and gave it to Alex. Here you go, everything I could find on your wife's change of will and other things. Alex took the envelope, his hands shaking. What did you find? First off, Henry said, locking eyes with Alex. Rose hired a private investigator a few months ago, discreet guy but not so discreet that I couldn't track him down. Alex nodded. That confirmed what he'd read in the diary. What else? The investigator gave her a full report on you and your little girlfriend. Henry continued photos, recordings, the whole package. Rose got it a week before she changed her will. Alex closed his eyes, feeling like he'd just been hit in the gut. She had known everything. That's not all, Henry said, his voice dropping to a whisper. The day before she died, Rose had a meeting with Luke. They were locked in her office for hours. Alex's eyes widened. What does he have to do with any of this? Henry shrugged. I can't say for sure, but I have an idea. I think Rose told Luke everything and made him some kind of guardian of her legacy. Alex took in this new information quietly. Suddenly Luke's cryptic warning started making sense. Do you think Luke's the one blackmailing us? Alex asked, his voice barely above a murmur. It's possible. Henry replied, but there's something else you need to know. I found something about Jessica's past that might interest you. A chill ran down Alex's spine. What is it? Henry glanced around before leaning in closer. It seems your dear Jessica isn't as innocent as she seems. She has a history of, let's just say, handy relationships with powerful men, and every time those men ended up losing a lot more than just their hearts. The revelation hit Alex like a ton of rocks. Had he just been another one of Jessica's targets, another wealthy guy to be manipulated? There's more information in the report, Henry said, pointing to the envelope. But I'll tell you, kid, you're not going to like what you read. Alex stared at the envelope in his hands, feeling like it held a bomb about to go off. Thanks, Henry, I owe you one. The old detective stood up, brushing crumbs off his jacket. You don't owe me anything. Consider it one last kindness, for old time's sake. But Alex, Henry added, his voice going serious, be careful, you're playing with fire and you might get burned worse than you think. With those words, Henry walked away, leaving Alex alone on the park bench carrying an envelope full of secrets. with an impossible choice ahead of him. Alex sat there for what felt like hours, the envelope weighing heavy in his hands as if it were made of LED around him. The city was waking up. Families strolled through the park, office workers rushed by with their coffee, dogs barked cheerfully. But to Alex, everything felt surreal, like he was watching the world through a foggy window. Finally, summoning all his bravery, he opened the envelope and started reading. With each page, his world fell apart a little more. The proof was undeniable. Photos of him and Jessica in compromising situations, transcripts of phone calls, detailed reports of their secret meetings. Rose had known everything, every sordid detail of his betrayal. But what really took his breath away was the information about Jessica. Henry hadn't overstated. There was a clear pattern of relationships with rich, powerful men, each one ending in scandal and financial ruin for them. Alex realized with terrible clarity that he was just the latest in a long line of targets. As he took all this, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Jessica. "Did you find out something? I need to see you." Alex looked at the message, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. How could he have been so blind, so foolish? With trembling hands, he typed a reply. "Yeah, we need to talk. Meet me at our regular cafe in an hour." He put the report back in his bag and stood up. He had 1 hour to decide what to do with all this information. 1 hour to choose between truth and lies, between redemption and downfall. As he walked toward his car, Alex Thompson realized that, no matter what he decided, his life would never be the same again. The game had changed, and now it was up to him to make the final move. Alex drove through the city streets, his mind racing. Every red light felt like torture. Every honk of a horn was a jab at his already frayed nerves. San Francisco City, always chaotic, felt especially hostile today. When Alex arrived at the cafe, he noticed Jessica was already there sitting at a corner table nervously playing with her cup. For a moment he stayed in the car just watching her. How could someone so beautiful be capable of so much deception? How had he been so naive? He took a deep breath and walked in. Jessica looked up and smiled, but her smile quickly faded as she saw the expression on Alex's face. "What's going on?" she asked as he sat down. "What did you find out?" Alex stared at her, searching her eyes for any sign of the woman he thought he knew everything. He said flatly. The color drained from Jessica's face. "What do you mean, everything?" Instead of answering, Alex pulled out Henry's report and laid it on the table. "Read it yourself." With trembling hands, Jessica opened the envelope and started reading. Alex watched as her expression shifted from confusion to fear and finally to a resigned defeat. "I can explain," she began, but Alex raised his hand to stop her. "I don't want excuses." Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her power. When she opened them again, there was a hardness in her look that Alex had never seen before. "The truth is, you're just like all the others, Alex, a rich, powerful man who thinks he can have everything. You think you're better than the rest. Just because you were married, you're worse." Her words cut like knives, but Alex stayed unfazed. "And Rose, did you ever think about her?" Jessica let out a bitter laugh. "Rose, she knew exactly what you were from the beginning. Why do you think she changed her will?" "It wasn't just revenge, Alex. It was to protect herself and her legacy from you." Each word felt like a painful revelation to Alex. He realized he had misjudged both women, Rose thinking he could deceive her without consequence, and Jessica believing she truly loved him. And now what Alex asked. Suddenly, feeling tired, Jessica leaned forward. "You have a choice to make. You can continue with contesting the will, but I promise you, I'll make sure every dirty detail of our affair comes to light." Alex looked at her, stunned by her audacity. "Are you blackmailing me?" "I call it bargaining," Jessica answered with a cold smile. "After all, isn't that what you're best at?" She stood up, grabbing her purse. "You have until tomorrow to decide. Alex, choose wisely." With that, she walked out, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts and the weight of his options. The rest of the day passed in a fog for Alex. He wandered the city streets, passing by buildings and landmarks that once symbolized his success but now only reminded him of his failures. By nightfall, he found himself standing in front of Rose's grave at the Dolores Cemetery. He stared at the Mar headstone, feeling a mix of shame and sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything." It was. At that moment he made his choice. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Luke," he said. When the voice on the other end picked up, "We need to talk about Rose's will and a lot of other things." As Alex walked back to his car, he felt as though a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing the right thing. The game was over and Alex Thompson was ready to face the results of his actions. Alex found himself sitting across from Luke. The glass desk between them felt like an invisible obstacle. "I'm glad you chose to talk, Uncle Alex," Luke said, his tone formal, a sharp contrast to the familiar term he used. "I assume you've come to some conclusions," Alex nodded, his face a mask of tiredness and resignation. "Yeah, you could say that I found a lot of things over the past few days." Luke leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Alex's. "And what do you plan to do with that information?" For a moment, Alex stayed silent, weighing his words carefully. Finally, with a deep sigh, he began to speak. "I'm removing my challenge to the will." Alex's voice was barely a whisper. "Rose, your aunt. She was right to do what she did. I don't deserve a smell of her fortune." A flicker of surprise crossed Luke's face, quickly replaced by a guarded look. "What made you change your mind?" Alex pulled Henry's report from his briefcase and put it on the desk. "This and some other revelations. I know Rose found out about my fling with Jessica. I know she changed the will because of it, and I know you were aware of everything." Luke took the report, glanced at it briefly, then gave it back to Alex. "That's right. Aunt Rose told me everything a few days before she passed. She asked me to protect her legacy, to make sure her last wishes were met." "Were you the one who blackmailed us?" Alex asked, though he already knew the answer. Luke shook his head. "Not directly. I paid someone to do it. I didn't want you to know. I was involved, at least not at first." Alex nodded, taking it in. "And Jessica, did you know about her background?" "We found out during the study." Luke confirmed. "Aunt Rose was distraught, not just by your betrayal, but by being deceived by someone she trusted." The weight of guilt hit Alex like a ton of bricks. He had hurt the woman who had given him everything. For what a fleeting thrill, the excitement of something illegal. "What happens now?" Alex asked suddenly, feeling small and fragile. Luke looked at him for a long moment before answering. "That depends on you, Uncle Alex. Aunt Rose, despite everything, never stopped loving you, even in her final days. She hoped you would change, that you'd realize your mistakes." Alex felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The thought that Rose, even after his betrayal, had still held out hope for him filled him with overwhelming regret. "I want to make things right," he finally said, his voice breaking slightly. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to honor Rose's spirit. I want to help carry out her wishes." Luke nodded slowly, as if he were weighing Alex's words. "That's surprising, but welcome. What exactly are you proposing?" "First, as I said, I'll publicly withdraw the challenge to the will," Alex began. "Second, I want to help with the charity projects Rose was planning. I know business, I have the connections, I can be helpful." "And what about Jessica?" Luke asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. Alex let out a tired sigh. "It's over. In fact, she gave me an option yesterday. I think she already knows I've decided not to continue with her games." Luke nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "Good, that simplifies things. But you should know, Uncle Alex, this won't be easy. People will talk, there will be whispers, speculation, I know." Alex replied. "I'm ready for that. I've spent too long caring about looks, worrying about what others think. It's time to face the truth, no matter the results." A silence settled between them, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faraway sound of city traffic. Finally, Luke stood up and offered his hand. "All right, Uncle Alex, I accept your offer. We'll work together to honor Aunt Rose's legacy. But I'm telling you, I'll be watching you closely. One mistake and it's over." "Got it." Alex stood and shook Luke's hand, feeling as if he had just signed a serious pact. "I won't let you down this time, not again." The following days were a whirlwind of action. Alex, true to his word, officially dropped his challenge to the will. News spread quickly among the groups of San Francisco's high society, sparking all kinds of speculation and rumors. Just as she had warned, Jessica tried leaking details of their affair to the press, but to her surprise she hit a wall of silence. Luke, anticipating her move, used his connections to ensure no major outlet would print the story. Frustrated and cornered, Jessica finally left the city, leaving behind only the bitter memory of a betrayal that almost destroyed the legacy of one of San Francisco's most respected women. Alex, for his part, threw himself into work. Alongside Luke, he began conducting the charitable projects that Rose had envisioned: schools in marginalized areas, health care clinics in rural communities, microcredit programs for women entrepreneurs. Each job was another step in his path to redemption. Some people accused him of losing his ambition, of getting soft. But for every critic there was a success story: a young girl going to school for the first time, a family getting medical care they could never have afforded before, a small business flourishing thanks to a timely loan. Slowly, the public's view of Alex began to shift. He was no longer seen as an opportunistic widower, but as a dedicated philanthropist, someone who truly cared about making a difference in others' lives. One afternoon, several months after his talk with Luke, Alex found himself once again standing in front of Rose's grave. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Luke stood beside him, both holding baskets of flowers. "A lot has happened since I was last here," Alex said, his voice soft but steady. "I've made mistakes, Ro, terrible mistakes that hurt you badly, but I hope that wherever you are, you can see I'm trying to make things right." Luke put a hand on Alex's shoulder. "I think she knows, Uncle. I think she'd be proud of what you've achieved these past few months." Alex nodded, a mix of sadness and hope filling his chest. "I still have a lot of work to do, a lot to make up for, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm on the right road." As they walked away from the grave, Alex glanced up at the sky. The sun was setting over San Francisco City, painting the horizon in shades of gold and crimson. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder that even after the darkest days there's always the hope of a new dawn. "You know, Luke," Alex said as they reached the cemetery gates, "I think I finally understand what Rose always used to say about the true value of things." Luke looked at him curiously. "What do you mean?" "She used to say that real wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you give." Alex replied, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. "I had to lose everything to really understand that." Luke nodded, respect clear in his face. "Aunt Rose was always smart. I'm glad you finally got her message." As they left the cemetery, Alex felt as if one chapter of his life was closing and another was starting. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing was certain: this time he would respect Rose's legacy not just with words, but with action. The sun dipped behind the city's skyline, giving way to the night, but for Alex Thompson it felt like the start of a new day full of options and the chance to finally get things right. Wow, what a powerful journey Alex went through, right from sadness to redemption. He learned the true value of life and that sometimes, losing everything is what it takes to find yourself again. If this story touched you as much as it did me, don't forget to hit that like button and share it with someone who could use a little inspiration today. Subscribe for more stories that move your heart and tell us all that it's never too late to make things right. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.